Hello, my name is Willem and I live on the Matlabas River in South Africa where I run a successful hunting operation. I own the land which is teeming with wildlife and incredible diversity of herbivores, predators, birds, reptiles, grasses, trees and shrubs. I'm happy to say that we are able to conserve this ecosystem because of hunting in them. But today I want to talk to the anti-hunting fraternity, especially those who give themselves out as so-called animal lovers and who regard the likes of me as bloodthirsty killers, mass murderers, psychopaths, or whatever other insult you can think up. I want to talk to the anti-hunting fanatics who live somewhere in North America or Europe, but who think they know best how the people of Africa should manage their wildlife and wildernesses. Some of you may have a genuine interest in wildlife and wild places, and you may really care, and I respect you for that. I just hope that you'll be able to adjust your misguided anti-hunting sentiments to the realities of 21st century conservation. Most of you have never been to Africa. Some of you may have visited a game reserve somewhere in Africa, and now that you've been to one of the tourist traps, you think you know it all, but you don't. You know nothing about the human-wildlife conflict that we have to face on an ongoing basis. You know nothing about the poaching and the serious risks it poses to African wildlife. You know nothing about the poverty, corruption, incompetent government, poor governance, droughts, diseases, or any of the other difficulties that we have to deal with out here in the African bush. Nor do you know anything of the different methods of land ownership in Africa and what it means for wildlife and conservation. You understand nothing about ecosystems, biomes, veld types, or the carrying capacity of the land for grazers, browsers, and mixed feeders. You have not studied wildlife management, nor do you have any practical experience. Yet you think you are qualified to prescribe to us how to manage our wildlife resources. Some of you are not only against hunting, but also against conservation and wildlife management, despite the conservation successes achieved over the years. We do not understand your bizarre view of the world, but perhaps you think that Africa is one big zoo where animals and people naturally live in perfect harmony. This is not the case. Since hunting outfitters like me are primarily conservationists, we find it difficult to see how there can be any common ground between us and you as long as you are opposed to conservation. We can only hope and pray that you will wake up to the real world that we live in. Then there are the vegans amongst you who believe that we should not eat meat. I have only one fundamental question for you. How much more habitat do you wish to take away from wildlife so that we can grow your carrots and salads for you? I've often been at the receiving end of your hatred and have been subjected to curses, insults, and foul language that I've not encountered from any other quarters, and have received lots of hate mail and wishes for my death. But this only makes my resolve stronger to continue with the good cause of conservation through sustainable utilization. It is unfortunate that the anti-hunting cabal is unable to see that their heathen-like behavior will only drive hunters and conservationists further away from the so-called animal lovers. You call me a killer and a murderer because I shoot animals on a sustainable basis. Yet most of you appear to be in favor of unrestricted abortion of human babies. So you think it is perfectly in order to kill an unborn human baby for whatever reason, but if I shoot an impala, I am the bad guy. This is bizarre indeed, and hypocrisy in the extreme. You often tell me that I hunt simply to satisfy my insatiable bloodlust. So let me explain why I am in the hunting business. I do this first and foremost because I see myself as a conservationist and because I believe in conservation through sustainable utilization. If you are also opposed to conservation, then I suppose we have nothing to say to one another. This is not a get-rich-quick business. If money was the major driver in my life, I would have followed any of a number of other far more profitable careers. I run a business where our carbon footprint is very limited. The question is, what business are you in? And how does your carbon footprint look? I have committed all my resources to my land and my wildlife and the conservation thereof. Then the next question is, what is your commitment to the natural environment, other than spitting venom all over the social media? How much of your money have you committed to your beloved animals? The bottom line is that I'm not wealthy, but I'm proud of what I'm doing. Unlike most countries in Africa, the South African wildlife management model permits private ownership of land and wildlife. Consequently, many landowners have turned away from agriculture and have made their land available for wildlife. There are almost 10,000 of us across the country. These private conservationists have been phenomenally successful in their conservation efforts and have played a major role in bringing a number of species back from the brink of extinction. These include black wildebeest, blesbok and bontebok. Species such as kudu, red hartebeest, gemsbok, sable and nyala have also been able to expand their distribution ranges and are now found in areas where they previously never occurred. Fact is that South Africa now has more wildlife than at any time during the last 150 years, with the exception, of course, of a few species such as springbok. The government's conservation agencies have done a splendid job in running the national parks and the reserves, but the private sector have done even better. Private land under wildlife now exceed the government's parks and reserves by about 7 times in hectares. The same goes for the number of wildlife animals. Yet you think it is appropriate to hate us for this, because we have to shoot a few animals each year in order to make this conservation model work. A model that works also thanks to the hunters' dollars. Perhaps the anti-hunting movement will succeed in having more bans and restrictions imposed on hunting, and you may rejoice with misplaced glee, but know this, you will have succeeded in the most heinous crime against our wildlife. If outfitters like me are no longer allowed to hunt on our land, the wild animals will have to be removed and the land turned over to the plow and the cow, or to housing development, or to some other so-called development. In South Africa, millions of wild animals will have to be destroyed to facilitate alternative land uses. The loss of diversity will not be confined to the flagship species which you usually rant and rave about, like lions and elephants, but will include species of mammals, birds, reptiles and plants that you have not even heard of. Wildlife will be restricted to a few national parks and reserves, exposing many species to increased risk. And you anti-hunters will be responsible, just like you're responsible for the demise of wildlife in countries like Kenya. This ought to be regarded as a crime against humanity.